Courage and determination can sometimes come from the darkest places, but we must always fight for the light. But one word rang clear in her mind: flesh. Her heart pounded. As she drifted off to sleep, she had a disturbing dream. Kemi arrived in town with the curious air of someone discovering a new world. After leaving her village, she dreamed of settling in a livelier place where every street corner abounded in secrets to be discovered. The city fascinated her with its contrasts. Modern skyscrapers rubbed shoulders with traditional markets, and in the midst of it all, she had heard of a small local restaurant offering unrivaled cuisine, run by a certain Mama Fatima. This reputation aroused her curiosity, especially as she had been passionate about cooking since childhood. Walking along the cobbled streets, Kemi eventually found the restaurant. A modest but charming establishment, its lacquered wooden front gave off a certain warmth. As soon as she entered, a spicy, intoxicating aroma enveloped her, instantly leading her to believe she was in the right place. The customers seemed calm, but captivated, tasting dishes that seemed to transport them to another world. It was here that she saw Mama Fatima for the first time. A woman with a face marked by time, but with a natural poise and assurance. Her gestures were precise, almost ritualistic, as she prepared the dishes with a mastery that exuded experience. Kemi, fascinated, had only one wish: to work alongside her. Kemi stepped timidly up to the counter. She didn't know where to start, but felt she had to seize this opportunity. With a shy smile, she approached Mama Fatima, who observed her for a long time before replying in a deep but warm voice. "I sense you're here for a reason," said Mama Fatima, fixing Kemi with a piercing gaze. "You want to learn, don't you?" Kemi nodded, impressed by this mysterious woman. She briefly explained her passion for cooking and her desire to learn more. Mama Fatima listened in silence, then led her into the kitchen without another word. The place exuded a special aura. Between the brass of pots and the flash of sharp knives, there was something almost sacred about it. Mama Fatima assigned her a few simple tasks to start with: peeling vegetables, observing cooking methods. Kemi felt she had a lot to learn, but above all, she sensed a strange alchemy in the air, as if each ingredient carried with it an ancient history. As the days went by, Kemi went to the restaurant earlier and earlier, eager to immerse herself in Mama Fatima's culinary world. The kitchen was much more than just a place to prepare meals. For Kemi, it was a laboratory of magic, a sanctuary where every movement, every smell, every flavor seemed to respond harmoniously. She watched Mama Fatima intently, trying to understand what made her dishes so special. There was something indescribable in her preparations. Aromas intermingled in a way Kemi had never experienced. The customers kept coming back, and their palpable satisfaction made Kemi's admiration grow. The more she worked in the kitchen, the more she felt a strange energy. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it was as if the kitchen itself was alive, breathing with the rhythm of the preparations. Mama Fatima, for her part, remained impassive, concentrated, almost mystical. After several weeks, Kemi was fully integrated into the team. Her colleagues, though friendly, always seemed on their guard. They rarely spoke to her outside of professional directives, and Kemi found this curious. Still, she was grateful for the opportunity. Routine was settling in, but each day also brought its share of discoveries. She learned the basics of cooking under the guidance of Mama Fatima. Every day, a new ingredient secret was revealed to her. Rare spices, complex cooking techniques. Yet she also noticed something strange. Certain ingredients were never mentioned in the recipes, but magically appeared on the shelves. The other members of the team often gave her furtive glances, as if they knew something she didn't. Kemi chose not to. Kemi chose not to pay attention, too absorbed in her desire to improve herself. One evening, as she finished cleaning the kitchen, Kemi heard strange noises coming from the storeroom. She approached, thinking perhaps a rat had crept in, but when she opened the door, everything seemed in order. Still, she couldn't help feeling a shiver run down her spine. She returned to her tasks, but couldn't shake the feeling. Later that night, as she drifted off to sleep, she had a disturbing dream. She saw herself in the kitchen, but everything was dark and hazy. Mama Fatima was handing her a dish, but when she looked at it more closely, It was filled with pieces of flesh she couldn't identify. When she awoke, Kemi was perplexed. Was this dream just a figment of her imagination, or was there something more to it? The next morning, Kemi arrived at the restaurant with a strange feeling of unease. She'd never paid attention to certain details before, but now everything seemed to jump out at her. Conversations between other employees were often whispered, as if secrets were constantly circulating around her. She went to her workstation, but couldn't help noticing that some of the shelves where the special ingredients were kept were still locked. Kemi wondered what Mama Fatima was hiding there. It was strange that, despite her perfect mastery of the kitchen, no one else was allowed to use these ingredients without her authorization. As the day wore on, Kemi felt the stares of the other employees intensify. They were watching her, but why? The fascination she had felt at first was beginning to be tinged with a slight fear. The following days were similar, but Kemi could no longer ignore the signs. The insistent glances, the ingredients that mysteriously disappeared, and above all, the noises. She began to realize that something was amiss in this kitchen. She began to observe Mama Fatima more critically, wondering if she knew more than she was letting on. Tried to ask one of her colleagues some questions, but he just gave her a tight smile and walked away. This attitude only intensified Kemi's doubts. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the restaurant became increasingly oppressive for Kemi. Although the work in the kitchen was always intense, she couldn't shake the feeling of being constantly watched. Every night, she went to bed with a weight on her chest, haunted by increasingly strange dreams in which the kitchen was transformed into a macabre place. She watched Mama Fatima discreetly, always calm and methodical, but something in her behavior now seemed different. Her gestures, once reassuring, now seemed more mechanical, as if she were executing a well-rehearsed choreography. As for the other employees, they seemed more distant, as if afraid to get too close to Kemi. One evening, as the restaurant emptied and the last customers left, Kemi found herself alone in the kitchen with Mama Fatima. The latter looked at her with unusual intensity, an imperceptible smile forming on her lips. "You're doing well, Kemi," she said quietly. "I think it's time you learned a few things." Mama Fatima's tone made Kemi shudder. What did she mean by a few things? She didn't have time to answer before the cook asked her to stay a little later that night for a special task. Kay wondered why Mama Fatima wanted her to stay longer that night. Although she felt honored, she couldn't suppress the worry that was rising inside her. The kitchen was now empty, and the dim lights created an almost surreal atmosphere. Mama Fatima led her to a small room at the back of the restaurant, a room Kemi had never noticed before. There, on an old wooden table, was laid out a series of ingredients that Kemi was unfamiliar with. Mama Fatima approached, her eyes shining with a strange light. She began to explain the recipe for a special dish, a dish that she said was not on any menu. "This is what the restaurant is known for," she said in a soft but firm voice. "If you want to be a great cook, you have to learn to master this." Kemi looked at the ingredients, puzzled, but a shiver ran down her spine. There was something sinister about it all, yet she said nothing and just nodded, listening to Mama Fatima's instructions while feeling a growing fear invade her. The night was long for Kemi. Back home, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen in that secret room. The ingredients, although strange, did not seem dangerous on the surface. However, there was a heavy, almost unhealthy atmosphere around this recipe. This feeling was reinforced when, in her sleep, she had another nightmare. She saw herself in the kitchen again, this time alone. The sounds of the city seemed distant, muffled. Mama Fatima was there, but she remained in the shadows, silent. Suddenly, Kemi saw something on the table. Pieces of flesh that were unfamiliar. She tried to look away, but an invisible force prevented her from doing so. She woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The next day, Kemi decided to confront one of her colleagues, an older man who seemed to have worked at the restaurant for years. She approached him discreetly during a break, but the moment she mentioned the special recipe, his face paled. "Don't ask questions, Kemi," he whispered, clearly frightened. "You don't want to know. Trust me." Her colleague's words echoed in Kemi's head. Why was he telling her not to ask questions? What did he mean by, "you don't want to know"? Kemi felt more and more trapped in this restaurant where everything seemed to revolve around well-kept secrets. In the days that followed, Kemi's dreams became more and more intense. Every night, she saw the same scene. Hands working on a cutting board, pieces of unknown meat, faces disappearing into the shadows. Each awakening left her more confused and more frightened. In the kitchen, Mama Fatima continued to train her, but there was now a palpable tension between them. Kemi felt that Mama Fatima was testing her, trying to see if she was ready to discover the restaurant's real secret. However, Kemi wasn't sure she wanted to know the truth. The stares of the other employees weighed heavily on her, as if everyone knew something she didn't. One morning, when she arrived at the restaurant, Kemi noticed that two of her colleagues were missing. When she asked for news, she was told that they had left suddenly, without explanation. However, Kemi remembered seeing them the day before, and there was nothing to suggest such an abrupt departure. Days passed, and other employees also seemed to disappear without a trace. This only increased Kemi's fears. She began to doubt everything, even her own perceptions. Was she becoming paranoid, or was there really a danger? Kemi tried to talk to Mama Fatima about it, but she remained evasive. "People come and go," she simply said with an enigmatic smile. But this smile did not reassure Kemi. Quite the contrary. Kemi began to spy on the other employees, hoping to catch snippets of conversation that might reveal what was really going on. One night, while she was hiding in the storeroom, she heard two employees talking in low voices. Their words were broken up by whispers, but one word rang clear in her mind: flesh. Her heart pounded. Kemi wasn't sure if she wanted to hear what happened next, but she was frozen in place. The two employees continued to speak in low voices, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. Suddenly, one of them turned his head toward where she was. Kemi curled up, holding her breath, praying she wouldn't be discovered. As the two employees left, Kemi sat up, her heart heavy. She knew now that she was touching the heart of a terrifying mystery, but she was not prepared to face it alone. Kemi's nightmares took a new turn. Every night, she saw the same scenes of horror repeat themselves. But this time, Mama Fatima spoke to her in her dreams. Her words were strange, almost prophetic. Everyone has to make sacrifices. Cooking demands a price. Kemi woke up each morning with a growing sense of dread. She began to doubt her sanity. The events in the restaurant haunted her to the point that she wondered if it was all just a series of coincidences, or if there was a deeper evil eating away at this place. She decided that she had to leave the restaurant. But first, she had to know the truth. This feeling of injustice, of not knowing, haunted her. If she left without understanding, she would be marked for life by doubt. One evening, after closing time, Kemi gathered her courage and decided to explore the kitchen. She headed to the secret room where Mama Fatima had shown her this special recipe. The place was dark, and an eerie silence reigned. As she searched, she found old records, recipe books. But what really caught her attention was a compartment hidden under a shelf. When she opened it, she discovered a series of documents and disturbing photographs. The faces of some former employees were there, people Kemi had never seen. And under these photos, one word came back again and again: flesh. Her heart stopped for a moment. Kemi understood that Mama Fatima did not use ordinary ingredients in her dishes. Kemi stood frozen in front of the documents she had just discovered. The word flesh echoed in her mind, while the faces of the former employees seemed more real than ever. She couldn't believe it was all true. How could Mama Fatima, the woman she trusted so much, hide such a horrible secret? She took the papers in her trembling hands, searching for a rational explanation, but nothing came. Each new page seemed to confirm her worst fears. She knew she had to leave, but some force kept her from fleeing. Kemi felt the need to understand the why and how. She knew confronting Mama Fatima would be risky, but there was no turning back. The next day, Kemi arrived at the restaurant with palpable nervousness. She tried to hide her unease, but her colleagues seemed to notice her unease. They all looked at her with the same intensity, as if they were waiting for her to finally discover the truth. Kemi tried to ask another colleague questions, but every time she mentioned what she had found, he changed the subject or abruptly fell silent. Fear was written all over their faces. They knew something, but they were terrified to speak. One evening, as the restaurant was closing, Kemi confronted one of the former team members, a man who had worked in the kitchens for several years. She approached him discreetly, imploring him to tell her what he knew. He stared at her for a long time, before sighing. "You shouldn't ask questions, Kemi," he whispered. "This restaurant, it has its own rules. Mama Fatima is not what you think. It is too late to turn back now." These words, full of mystery and fear, left Kemi perplexed. But instead of discouraging her, they strengthened her determination. She had to know the truth, even if it meant plunging into a world of darkness. A few days later, Kemi felt that Mama Fatima had understood that something had changed. She was giving her piercing looks, scrutinizing her every move. Kemi, for her part, tried to remain calm, but she felt the noose tightening around her. One evening, when the restaurant was closing its doors, Mama Fatima asked Kemi to stay. Alone in the kitchen with her, Kemi felt an icy cold, although the stoves were still alight. "Kemi," said Mama Fatima in a low but authoritative voice, "I sense that you are asking yourself questions. Maybe you found things that don't concern you. But know this, in this kitchen, everyone has a role to play, and some secrets are better kept." Mama Fatima approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder, a cold smile on her lips. "If you want to stay here, you have to accept what's happening. Otherwise..." She left her sentence hanging, but the threat was clear. Kemi shivered. She knew she had just crossed a point of no return. That night, Kemi barely slept. Mama Fatima's words echoed in her head. She knew she should have left immediately after discovering those documents, but something still held her back. Was it fear, curiosity, or a morbid fascination with this restaurant that now gave off an aura of dread? Kemi began to make plans to escape. She could leave the city, go back to her old life. Yet every time she imagined leaving, a small voice inside would bring her back to that restaurant. It wasn't just a matter of survival, it was also a matter of truth. She wondered if, after discovering all this, she could truly abandon those like her who were trapped in this place. The employees all seemed to be under the influence of an invisible power, a force that made it impossible for them to speak or escape. One morning, Kemi noticed that one of the employees who had told her about the flesh had disappeared. His position was vacant, and no one seemed to want to talk about it. She remembered what he had told her. It's too late to turn back. Kemi felt that her own time was running out. She questioned the other employees, but each of them avoided the subject, pretending that the man had simply left town. Yet Kemi knew that this was not true. The restaurant was hiding something much darker, and she was about to sink into it. Mama Fatima, for her part, acted as if nothing had happened. She continued to cook with the same precision, the same rigor, but Kemi knew that this facade hid an abyss. The absence of the missing employee did not seem to worry anyone, as if it were part of the restaurant's routine. One night, when the restaurant was closing its doors, Kemi decided to venture back into the storeroom, where she had discovered the documents. This time she went deeper, exploring every corner for more clues. As she rummaged behind an old cupboard, she smelled a nauseating odor. Shifting a few objects, she discovered a hidden space in the floor, a locked compartment. With a key she had found in Mama Fatima's office, Kemi opened this compartment and discovered horror incarnate: human remains. She stepped back, her heart pounding, unable to believe what she was seeing. The pieces were carefully wrapped, as if this macabre treasure were an integral part of the cooking process. Kemi finally understood the truth. Human flesh was the secret ingredient of Mama Fatima's restaurant. The shock of this discovery nearly broke Kemi. She spent the entire night crying, overwhelmed by the reality of what she had found. How could she continue to work here, preparing dishes, knowing what was hidden behind the recipes? Every bite the customers took was a violation of morality, an act of cannibalism in disguise. Kemi felt sick at the thought of setting foot in the kitchen again. Yet she knew she couldn't just leave. If she ran now, she would put herself in danger. Mama Fatima was watching her, and it was obvious she wouldn't let someone who knew so much go. Kemi had to play a dangerous game. She had to continue to pretend that she knew nothing, while looking for a way to escape. Mama Fatima seemed to have sensed a change in Kemi. She became more attentive to her every move. Felt her gaze weighing on her at every moment. Any suspicious movement, Any innocent question could be interpreted as a sign of rebellion. She knew that Mama Fatima would not hesitate to make her disappear like the others. Kemi tried to hide her fear, working with even more zeal, hoping to divert Mama Fatima's attention. But nothing seemed to escape this woman. Every day, the tension increased, and Kemi knew that her time was running out. Mama Fatima began to involve her more in the special preparations. She now asked her to handle some of the ingredients that, until then, Kemi had only observed from afar. Every time she touched one of these pieces, she felt a dull terror, as if she herself were participating in this macabre ritual. As Kemi felt more and more trapped, another employee, a young woman named Mariam, came to talk to her one evening. Mariam had only recently started working at the restaurant, but she had noticed the fear in it. "I know what you saw," Mariam whispered in a trembling voice. "I discovered things too. But there is a way out of here. You just have to be careful." Kemi looked at her, shocked but hopeful. She was not alone. Mariam explained that she too had found evidence of Mama Fatima's secret, but that she had never dared to confront the cook directly. "You have to be very careful," she said. "The ones who tried to leave or talk, they disappeared." Kemi, relieved to have an ally, felt her spirits lighten, but the fear remained. Mariam had a plan. They would collect tangible evidence and deliver it to the police. However, this had to be done discreetly, without arousing Mama Fatima's suspicions. Mariam confided in her that several employees had disappeared recently, but no one dared to ask questions for fear of reprisals. "We have to find a way to get out together, without her suspecting anything," she added. It was risky, but Kemi knew it was their only chance. Kemi and Mariam spent the next few days discreetly gathering evidence. During breaks, they searched the corners of the restaurant for concrete evidence. Suspicious delivery records, missing documents, and unidentified ingredients in the refrigerators. One night, they decided to return to the storeroom where Kemi had discovered the human remains. This time, Mariam accompanied her. Together, they managed to find new evidence, labels with the names of former employees and pieces of bloody cloth. It was enough to convince the authorities, but they knew they had to act quickly. Mariam offered to use her phone to take pictures, but they couldn't send the evidence directly without risking surveillance. Kemi felt increasingly cornered, each day a struggle to hide their investigation from Mama Fatima. As Kemi and Mariam busied themselves in the kitchen, Mama Fatima appeared more relaxed, as if she had no idea what was being planned. She continued to supervise the preparations with her usual calm, but Abike knew that beneath that facade lurked a woman capable of the worst. Despite the stress, Kemi and Mariam continued to collect evidence, while pretending not to know anything. The plan was simple. When they had enough evidence, they would discreetly contact the police. However, an unexpected event shattered their fragile sense of security. A new, particularly important customer announced his visit to the restaurant. Mama Fatima suddenly became more nervous, insisting that everything be perfect. Kemi sensed that something strange was brewing behind this visit. The evening the mysterious customer arrived, the restaurant was buzzing. Kemi noticed that Mama Fatima was paying particular attention to a dish she had never seen before. She and Mariam were excluded from the preparation of the latter, but took a sneak peek. There were pieces of flesh there that could not be of animal origin. The customer arrived with a small delegation. He seemed influential and spoke quietly to Mama Fatima, who reserved darker smiles than usual for him. Kemi and Mariam, discreetly observing the scene, understood that this meal was much more than just a dinner. It was a kind of ritual. Kemi's heart sank when she realized that the customer probably knew the nature of Mama Fatima's cooking, and that's why he was here. It was a disgusting complicity, an unspoken pact around this abomination. After this terrifying evening, Kemi and Mariam understood that they had to act quickly. They planned their escape. Their goal was to escape before Mama Fatima discovered what they were up to. Kemi began to hide clothes and a few personal belongings outside the restaurant in a small abandoned warehouse nearby. Mariam, for her part, discreetly contacted a former colleague who could help them get out of town once they had delivered the evidence to the police. But before they could leave, they had to make sure everything was ready. Every second was crucial. Kemi barely slept, consumed by anxiety. If they were discovered before they acted, they would suffer the same fate as the other missing people. Everything seemed in place, but at the last moment, Kemi noticed a change in Mariam. She seemed more distant, more nervous. Something was wrong. Kemi couldn't help but think that maybe Mariam was being watched, or worse, that she had been turned by Mama Fatima. Her suspicions were confirmed when, late at night, Kemi surprised Mariam talking to Mama Fatima in a dark corner of the restaurant. They were whispering, and although Kemi couldn't hear their words clearly, she felt a coldness take hold of her. Mariam had betrayed their plan. Kemi realized that if Mariam had denounced her, she was in great danger. She had to flee immediately, alone. But how could she escape without arousing the suspicions of Mama Fatima, who was now on alert? Kemi couldn't wait any longer. Knowing that Mariam had betrayed her, she decided to leave the restaurant that night without telling anyone. She took the evidence she had carefully hidden, the documents, the photos, and silently left through the back of the restaurant. The night was dark, and a light rain was falling. Her heart was pounding as she made her way to the warehouse where she had hidden her belongings. Every sound, every movement in the shadows terrified her, but she kept going, driven by the instinct to survive. As she finally reached the warehouse, Kemi heard footsteps behind her. She quickly hid behind stacked crates, holding her breath. A figure appeared in the darkness. It was Mama Fatima, who was looking for her. She was no longer the caring cook they had known, but a predator stalking her prey. Kemi knew she had no choice. If she wanted to survive, she had to run now, no matter what. Kemi waited for Mama Fatima to move away before she came out of hiding. Out of breath, she ran through the dark alleys of the city, avoiding the few people who passed by at night. Every shadow seemed to follow her. Every sound made her jump. She knew she had only one chance to escape before Mama Fatima caught up with her. She headed towards the edge of the city, but she knew she needed a safe place to hide until morning. Her clothes were soaked by the rain and her hands were shaking. She couldn't afford to stop because Mama Fatima would never give up the hunt. Kemi spotted an old abandoned building, a disused factory. She slipped inside discreetly, finding shelter in a dark corner between rusty machines. The oppressive silence of the place was only interrupted by the frantic beating of his heart. As Kemi slowly caught her breath, she heard voices approaching. She realized with horror that Mama Fatima was not alone in searching for her. Men, probably accomplices or loyal customers, had joined the hunt. She could hear their whispers through the concrete walls, echoing like an imminent threat. Kemi tried to move silently, looking for a way out, but the factory was a veritable labyrinth. She had to avoid the sound of approaching footsteps, and above all, not leave any traces. Her heart was beating faster and faster, darkness enveloped her, and she had to rely on her instincts to avoid falling into their hands. As she rushed down a long corridor, she realized that it led to a dead end. Panicked, she looked for a place to hide. She found a small trapdoor in the floor, leading to a flooded basement. With no other option, she stepped into the icy water, hoping that it would be enough to deter her pursuers. In the damp darkness of the basement, Kemi was assailed by memories. She relived every moment she had spent in Mama Fatima's kitchen. The knowing glances of the employees, the sinister smiles, and especially the pieces of human flesh she had seen pass before her eyes. The horror of these memories nearly overwhelmed her, but she had to stay focused. She knew that to get through this, she had to stay strong. The voices above the trapdoor gradually faded away. Kemi slowly rose to the surface, casting a cautious glance around her. She was alone, but for how long? She had to find a way to leave the city without being detected. Her thoughts were confused, torn between the fear of capture and the determination to reveal the truth. She remembered Mariam, her betrayal, but also all those still trapped under Mama Fatima's influence. This fight was no longer just about her own survival. Justice had to be done. Kemi knew that the city was no longer safe. She decided to leave the city center and head for the forest that bordered the outskirts of the city. There, she could hide and think about her plan. The streets were deserted at this late hour, but she moved quickly, fearing that she would be caught at any moment. She finally reached the edge of the forest, where the thick trees offered ideal cover. But the forest, although a natural refuge, was also unfamiliar territory for her. Kemi knew that Mama Fatima probably had men on her trail, but in the woods, she would have the advantage of the rough terrain and darkness. She pushed deeper into the forest, making her way through branches and bushes. The rustling of leaves and the distant cries of nocturnal animals created a heavy atmosphere. Kemi was cold, but the heat of the adrenaline gave her the strength to continue. After several hours of walking, an exhausted Kemi came across an old wooden cabin, abandoned for years, deep in the forest. It was her only chance of shelter for the night. She opened the rickety door and discovered a dusty but relatively intact interior. She sat down on the cold ground, finally catching her breath. Her muscles were sore and her body was crying out for rest. But before she could lie down, she searched the cabin for supplies or a way to communicate with the outside world. She found an old broken radio, a few rusty tools, and an old unloaded hunting rifle. As she was about to fall asleep, Kemi heard a noise outside. She sat up tensely and peered through a crack in the wall. Figures were moving between the trees. Mama Fatima had found her trail, and the hunt was not over yet. In the dilapidated hut, Kemi stood still, her eyes fixed on the figures outside. Her heart was pounding. Mama Fatima's men were searching methodically through the forest, passing close to the hut without yet spotting it. She had no way to defend herself if she was discovered, except for this old, useless rifle. She prayed that the darkness of the night and the thickness of the trees would work in her favor. The minutes passed slowly, every sound outside sounding like an imminent threat. The figures finally moved away, and Kemi could breathe again. She knew, however, that it was only a matter of time before they returned. She had to leave the hut by early morning, but for now, she had to recover some minimum of strength. She lay down against the cold ground, trying to find a fitful sleep, despite the anxiety that gripped her. The next morning, Kemi was awakened by a dull noise outside the hut. Standing up, she peeked through the crack in the wall, and this time, she didn't see Mama Fatima's men, but a stranger. A sturdy man, dressed in old hunting gear, seemed to be inspecting the area around the cabin. Her instincts told her to hide, but something about the man's manner seemed different. He didn't look like one of Mama Fatima's accomplices. She decided to show herself, cautiously, hoping that he wouldn't give her up. The man was surprised when he saw her, but he didn't show any aggression. His name was Ibrahim, a former hunter who still came to the forest occasionally. After a moment of tense silence, Kemi told him part of her story. She avoided talking directly about the cannibalism, but insisted that she was being hunted by dangerous people. Ibrahim believed her. He suggested that she stay hidden in the cabin for a few more hours, while he made sure the way was clear for her to leave the forest safely. Kemi accepted Ibrahim's offer with relief. Although she remained wary, she understood that she could not survive alone against Mama Fatima's men. The hunter gave her some supplies and showed her a less traveled path through the forest. As they talked, Kemi learned more about the history of the area. Ibrahim explained that rumors had always circulated about Mama Fatima's restaurant, but that no one had ever dared to investigate closely. She is a powerful woman with friends in high places, he said. This information reinforced conviction that she absolutely had to bring irrefutable evidence to the authorities. Ibrahim offered to accompany her to a nearby town where she could find temporary refuge and make a more solid plan to denounce Mama Fatima. But they knew that the road would be risky because Mama Fatima's men could still hunt them down. On the way to the nearby town, Kemi and Ibrahim remained cautious. Every step through the dense forest reminded them that they were still in danger. Kemi felt anxiety gnaw at her with every rustle of leaves, every crunch under their feet. They finally arrived at the edge of a small village that served as a passage between the forest and the town. But when they arrived, something seemed strange. The village was strangely quiet. There was no sign of life. The houses were closed and the streets deserted. Ibrahim frowned, sensing that something was wrong. Kemi quickly understood that it was a trap. She saw, in the distance, a black car that she had already seen near Mama Fatima's restaurant. The cook's men were already there, waiting for them to show themselves. Caught in a trap, Kemi and Ibrahim had only one option: to return to the forest hoping to find another way before their pursuers caught up with them. The duo headed deeper into the forest, but this time the hunt was more intense. Mama Fatima's men were hot on their heels, and Kemi knew they wouldn't give them a chance if they were captured. Fatigue was starting to weigh on her shoulders, but she kept running, driven by her survival instincts. Ibrahim, more accustomed to the terrain, tried to lead them to an old abandoned quarry, a place where they could hide and set a trap for their pursuers. But before they reached the quarry, one of Mama Fatima's men spotted them and shouted to his accomplices. A confrontation became inevitable. Ibrahim, armed with his old rifle, though almost out of ammunition, faced their pursuers, determined to protect Kemi at all costs. The men were approaching, and Kemi felt that this might be the end. As the tension mounted, a gunshot rang out, followed by a cry of pain. Ibrahim had fired, but that shot would not be enough to stop the oncoming pack. Kemi knew that they would have to be cunning to escape. Their enemies were now very close, and Kemi understood that her survival and the truth she carried depended on this final battle. Kemi and Ibrahim were now caught in a vice. Mama Fatima's men were approaching the quarry, their heavy footsteps and hoarse voices echoing through the forest. Ibrahim, positioned behind a rock, scanned the terrain with intense concentration. He had only one bullet left. Their fate seemed sealed. Kemi, crouched behind him, was thinking of a plan. Running away was no longer an option. They had to disorient their pursuers and blend into the forest. Suddenly, she noticed an old tunnel that went underground, hidden by thick bushes. A tunnel that seemed to lead them even deeper into the bowels of the quarry. "This way, quickly," she whispered to Ibrahim. He hesitated for a moment before realizing that this was their only way out. Together, they slipped into the darkness of the tunnel, hoping that it would offer them a respite, even temporary. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and the air was stifling. Kemi and Ibrahim moved slowly, their feet sinking into the wet earth. Each step echoed like a macabre echo in this underground passage, and Kemi felt her breath shorten. She felt as if she were going down ever further, as if this tunnel had no end. Ibrahim, despite his fatigue, remained calm. He vaguely remembered that this passage had once been used by miners, but he did not know where it led. The goal, for now, was simply to escape their pursuers. However, they could not remain hidden here indefinitely. At some point, they would have to resurface. The atmosphere was becoming more and more oppressive, and Kemi felt that they were approaching a breaking point. But she refused to give in to panic. After several hours in the tunnel, Kemi finally saw a light in the distance. They advanced cautiously, and soon they came out into a secluded clearing surrounded by thick trees. It was a kind of hidden sanctuary, far from prying eyes. For the first time in days, Kemi felt safe, even if she knew it would not last. Ibrahim, still alert, inspected the surroundings. "I think we can stay here for a while. Time to think about what's next," he said calmly. But Kemi knew they couldn't run forever. Mama Fatima was too powerful, her tentacles reaching far beyond the city. If Kemi wanted to destroy her empire of terror, she had to find a way to confront her directly. It meant taking enormous risks, but she had no choice. Sitting by a small fire that Ibrahim had managed to light, Kemi thought hard about what to do next. "I can't keep running like this," she finally admitted. "If I'm going to get out of this, I have to take her down. I have to find proof that I can show the authorities or the media." Ibrahim looked at her silently, then nodded. "If that's what you want, then I'll follow you," he said. "But you have to know that it could cost you your life." Kemi was ready. She had gone from survival to rebellion. She wanted justice for all of Mama Fatima's victims. "I know," she said, her voice anew determined, "but I can't back out." They made a pact. Together, they would find a way to get back to the city, infiltrate the restaurant again, and collect the evidence needed to dismantle Mama Fatima's empire. But to do that, they needed a bold plan. After several days in the forest, Kemi and Ibrahim decided to go back to the city, but this time, undercover. Kemi knew that Mama Fatima was still looking for her, and that her men were probably watching every corner. They needed new identities, disguises, and most importantly, a way to sneak into the restaurant without being seen. Ibrahim knew an old friend, a forger, who could provide them with the papers they needed to go unnoticed. They went to his house in a seedy part of town. This man, although a little reluctant at first, agreed to help them in exchange for a sum of money that Ibrahim had hidden. Once the papers were in hand, Kemi felt ready to face what was to come. The hardest part was yet to come. Infiltrating the restaurant, recovering the evidence, and getting out alive. With their new papers, Kemi and Ibrahim were unrecognizable. Kemi, now under the name of Amina, pretended to be a new employee looking for work. Ibrahim, meanwhile, would discreetly infiltrate the restaurant's surroundings to monitor the comings and goings and act in case of danger. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance to recover the information needed to bring down Mama Fatima. Kemi knew that returning to this cursed place was an extremely dangerous gamble. Every employee, every customer could betray her at any moment. She entered the restaurant doors with a dull anxiety, but she skillfully concealed her fear under a mask of neutrality. Mama Fatima was not there when she arrived, but one of her men received her, visibly suspicious. But her papers were in order, and she was allowed to work in the kitchens. Back in the kitchens, Kemi felt like she was diving back into a nightmare. The atmosphere was still heavy, marked by a heavy silence, punctuated by discreet murmurs between the employees. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with a sort of distrust. Kemi resumed her place, pretending not to remember the horrors she had discovered here. But she was constantly on her guard. This time she knew what was really going on, and every detail, every suspicious ingredient pushed her to look for evidence. Her plan was simple: collect samples, analyze them outside the restaurant, and expose the truth. But she had to remain discreet. One wrong move and all would be lost. As Kemi worked in silence, a familiar voice rang out behind her. It was Mama Fatima. She had just entered the kitchen, her piercing gaze crossing the room. Kemi felt her heart stop for a moment. She had to avoid any direct contact with her. But Mama Fatima seemed to notice her. She approached slowly, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "A new recruit?" she asked in a suave tone. Kemi lowered her head, hoping that her disguise would be enough to protect her. Mama Fatima moved away after a few seconds that seemed to last an eternity. Kemi understood that this time, she would not be given a second chance. The slightest sign of weakness or error would betray her. Every night, after her work hours, Kemi took refuge in a small room rented by Ibrahim in a seedy hotel. She made sure to keep the samples she had stolen, hiding evidence of Mama Fatima's crimes. But the nightmares had returned, stronger than ever. She saw gruesome scenes, the bodies, the faces of the victims, and most of all, Mama Fatima's carnivorous smile. Every night she woke up in a sweat, her mind on alert, aware that the slightest mistake could condemn her to become the next victim. She felt like she was walking a tightrope. The slightest misstep could be fatal. After several weeks of accumulating evidence, Kemi and Ibrahim decided it was time to act. They had enough samples to incriminate Mama Fatima, but they still had to find a way to get this information to the authorities. Without risking interception, time was running out. Mama Fatima sensed something was amiss in her restaurant. She had tightened security, and her men had become more suspicious. Kemi and Ibrahim knew they had to act fast before Mama Fatima figured out what they were up to. So they hatched a bold plan to send the evidence to an investigative journalist known for his courage in the face of the powerful. The time for the final assault was approaching, and Kemi felt that a confrontation with Mama Fatima would be inevitable. Kemi and Ibrahim knew that time was against them. They had enough samples to accuse Mama Fatima of her heinous crimes, but they still had to get the evidence out of the restaurant and to the investigative journalist. Ibrahim had prepared a motorbike, hidden in a dark alley not far from the restaurant, ready to leave at any moment. The plan was simple in theory, but terribly risky in practice. Kemi had to retrieve the last of the evidence, including incriminating records, and escape without arousing suspicion. Ibrahim, meanwhile, would serve as a distraction by attracting the attention of Mama Fatima's henchmen. By evening, they were ready. It was now or never. That evening, Kemi discreetly entered Mama Fatima's office, located just behind the kitchen. The documents she was looking for were there, locked in a small cabinet. Thanks to the information she had gathered over the weeks, she managed to unlock the lock without being noticed. Inside, she discovered damning files. Records of meat deliveries, photos of some of the victims, contracts made with high-ranking accomplices. She couldn't believe her eyes. This documentation proved that Mama Fatima was not only cooking human flesh, but that she was running a veritable human trafficking ring. With these documents in hand, Kemi knew she held the keys to bringing down the entire empire. But suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone was coming. She had to leave immediately. Kemi made it out of the office just in time, hiding the files under her apron. She quickly crossed the kitchen, her heart pounding. At that moment, Ibrahim created a diversion outside, causing an incident that attracted the attention of the goons. Everyone rushed out, giving Kemi a few precious seconds to slip away. She joined Ibrahim at the back of the restaurant, where the motorbike was waiting. "Let's go," he whispered, taking one last look at the building. But just as they were about to leave, a blood-curdling scream rang out behind them. Mama Fatima had just discovered their betrayal. Her eyes, filled with fury, fixed on Kemi with unspeakable hatred. "You won't get out of this alive, Kemi," she screamed before ordering her men to chase them. Ibrahim started the motorcycle, and they set off at full speed through the dark alleys of the city. Behind them, Mama Fatima's men gave chase, armed and determined to stop them at all costs. Kemi felt her adrenaline rising. She knew that if they were captured, it would be the end. The roads were slippery, and Ibrahim did his best to avoid the cars and obstacles that stood in their way. But their pursuers were getting closer, and the shots were starting to fly in their direction. Kemi ducked to avoid the bullets, while clutching tightly to her the documents that could bring Mama Fatima down. Their only hope now lay in reaching the journalist before it was too late. After a frantic race, they finally reached the outskirts of town, where the investigative journalist, a certain Adamu, was waiting for them in an abandoned warehouse, as agreed. Out of breath and covered in sweat, Kemi and Ibrahim got off the motorcycle and rushed towards the warehouse. Adamu greeted them quickly and led them inside. Kemi handed him the evidence without missing a beat. "It's all here," she said, panting. "The evidence of what she does, of what she is. You have to expose this to the world." Adamu looked through the documents, his face falling as he understood the magnitude of the horrors committed by Mama Fatima. "I'll publish all this, but you have to leave town. They won't leave you alone," he said gravely. Just as Kemi and Ibrahim thought they had found temporary refuge, one of Mama Fatima's men, who had infiltrated the journalist's contacts, managed to locate their location. They were not as safe as they thought. Mama Fatima had spies everywhere, and she now knew where they were. The trap suddenly snapped shut. As Kemi, Ibrahim, and Adamu discussed a plan to escape, gunfire rang out outside. Mama Fatima had sent her men to eliminate all witnesses. Ibrahim knew they were running out of time. "We have to leave now," he shouted. But before they could react, one of Mama Fatima's men entered the warehouse, armed and ready to kill. In the chaos that followed, Ibrahim made a desperate decision. He knew they had no chance of getting out of this together. "Leave," he ordered Kemi, holding his rifle at the ready to fight. "I'll hold them back." Distraught, refused to abandon her at first, but Ibrahim insisted. "You must survive, Kemi. You have the evidence. Go, expose the truth." With tears in her eyes, Kemi left the warehouse with Adamu, leaving her faithful companion behind. Ibrahim faced Mama Fatima's men with unwavering courage, ready to do anything to give Kemi a chance to escape. Kemi and Adamu managed to escape Mama Fatima's men thanks to Ibrahim, but the cost of this sacrifice was immense. Kemi felt devastated, but she knew she had to see it through to honor the memory of those who had given their lives for this cause. The next day, Adamu published the evidence on all major media platforms. The incriminating documents, the records of the victims, and the photos of the bodies were exposed to the light of day. Public outrage was immediate. Mama Fatima, once untouchable, was now the target of the authorities and the population. But Kemi knew that it would not be enough. Mama Fatima was still free, and she would seek revenge. Mama Fatima, hunted by the police and cornered, made a last-ditch attempt to eliminate Kemi. She found her in a small town where she had temporarily taken refuge, hoping that the media storm would calm down. One evening, when Kemi finally thought she could find some respite, Mama Fatima appeared before her, alone, but as dangerous as ever. "You have destroyed everything I have built," she said with cold rage. and you will pay for it. The much-feared face-off between Kemi and Mama Fatima finally took place. But this time, Kemi was no longer the terrified young woman fleeing for her life. She was determined, ready to face this woman who had destroyed so much. A fierce fight ensued, in which Mama Fatima showed how ruthless she could be. But Kemi, driven by the power of justice and Ibrahim's sacrifice, eventually overcame her. Mama Fatima, defeated and finally captured by the police, was tried for her countless crimes. The trial was attended by thousands of people, and the testimonies of the victims, as well as the overwhelming evidence gathered by Kemi, sealed her fate. She was sentenced to life in prison for murder, human trafficking, and cannibalism. Kemi, for her part, sought neither glory nor recognition. She returned to anonymity, determined to rebuild her life, but she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Ibrahim's sacrifice had taught her that the fight for truth and justice was a demanding but essential quest. She returned to cooking, not to escape her past, but to make sense of it. She began teaching young women in her community the art of cooking, transforming traditional recipes into a way to unite people, to honor those who had suffered under Mama Fatima. The kitchen became a space for healing and sharing, far from the darkness that had once surrounded her. The media continued to report on the case, the hunt for and capture of Mama Fatima. Their stories inspired people everywhere, inspiring others to speak out against abuse and injustice. Kemi, though never seeking recognition, became a voice for those who had been silenced. She could not forget Ibrahim. Every time she prepared a meal, she was reminded of his courage. One day, while cooking for a group of young people, she told her story, fighting back tears. Courage and determination can sometimes come from the darkest places, but we must always fight for the light. Inspiring other young women became her greatest strength. Through Ibrahim and those who had suffered, she had discovered the power of resilience and hope. As the days passed, Kemi was able to transform her pain into a powerful force for change. Mama Fatima's restaurant was closed, but Kemi began to dream of opening her own place, a space where food would be a place of safety, warmth, and love, far from the horrors of her past. And so, over time, the city began to heal. The memories of Mama Fatima slowly faded, replaced by new stories of resilience, courage, and hope, embodied by Kemi.